The iron bit into my wrists so deeply that I stopped feeling the pain after the first mile. They say you never forget the sound of chains, the way they sing against cobblestone, the rhythm they make as they drag you toward your death. But I'm here to tell you something they don't put in the history books, something that changed the fate of an entire kingdom in a single afternoon. Because when they threw me at the feet of King Harald the Merciless, when his entire court expected my execution, I spoke 7 words that brought the most powerful men in Denmark to their knees. My name is Astrid, and this is the story of how a blacksmith's daughter became the woman who rewrote the laws of the land. The accusation. It started 3 weeks before that fateful day in the throne room. I was working the forge in my father's shop in the lower quarters of Roskilde, the royal city. We weren't nobles. We weren't warriors. We were craftsmen. And in those days that meant you kept your head down, did your work, and never ever questioned the order of things. Especially if you were a woman. But I had a problem. I couldn't keep my mouth shut when I saw injustice. The trouble began when Jarl Esker, one of King Harald's most trusted advisors, rode through our street with his men. They were collecting the winter tax, which was already crippling for families like mine. But Esker had decided to impose an additional levy. Not because the kingdom needed it, not because there was war or famine, but because he wanted to build a 3rd manor house on the coast. I watched as he took the last coins from old Signa, a widow who lived 3 doors down from our forge. She had 5 children, and I knew for a fact she'd gone without food for 2 days to save enough for the king's tax. When Esker demanded more, she fell to her knees and begged. He laughed. That laugh, cold and sharp as winter wind, it did something to me. Before I knew what I was doing, I'd stepped out from the forge, my hammer still in my hand, soot on my face and arms. That's enough, I said. The street went silent. You could hear the smoke rising from chimneys. Esker turned his horse toward me slowly. His face twisted in something between amusement and disbelief. What did you say, girl? I said that's enough. She's paid the king's tax. The rest is theft, not law. His men shifted in their saddles. Some of them laughed. A woman challenging a jarl was apparently entertainment. Esker's smile grew wider, but his eyes went cold. A woman speaks of law. Do you even know your place, blacksmith's daughter? I know theft when I see it, my lord. And I know that stealing from widows isn't law. It's cruelty dressed in authority. The laughter stopped. My father appeared in the doorway of the forge, his face white as ash. But I couldn't take it back, and truthfully I didn't want to. Esker dismounted. He walked toward me slowly, deliberately, like a wolf approaching wounded prey. When he was close enough that I could smell the mead on his breath, he spoke quietly, so only I could hear. You've just signed your death warrant, girl. Women who forget their place don't live long in my Denmark. Then louder for everyone to hear. Seize her. Take her to the dungeons. She'll answer to the king for treason. Treason. The word hung in the air like an executioner's blade. In those days, questioning a jarl was questioning the king himself. And questioning the king meant death. But for a woman to challenge a man's authority in public, that was something worse than treason. That was an offense against the natural order itself. The dungeon. They threw me into the deepest cell beneath the royal fortress, a place so far underground that you couldn't tell day from night. The only light came from a torch in the corridor, and even that was more shadow than illumination. The chains they'd clamped on my wrists were old iron, rusted with the blood of previous prisoners. The guards made sure to tell me what happened to women who defied men in power. They described it in detail, the punishments, the humiliations, the examples made of those who forgot their place. They wanted me to break before I ever reached the king. But I'd spent my whole life being told what women couldn't do. Couldn't work the forge. Too delicate. Couldn't handle business. Too emotional. Couldn't speak in public. Too shrill. Couldn't own property. Too irresponsible. Couldn't think for themselves. Too simple-minded. I'd watched my mother die in childbirth because no one would listen when she said something was wrong. What did a woman know about her own body? I'd watched my sister's husband beat her, and when she reported it, she was told to be a better wife. I'd watched talented women reduced to decoration, intelligent women dismissed as hysterical, strong women called unnatural. So the guards' threats didn't break me. They clarified everything. I had 3 weeks in that darkness to think about my choices. 3 weeks to prepare for death. 3 weeks to decide what I would say when I faced the king. Other prisoners came and went during those weeks. Some were thieves, some were murderers, but many were just ordinary people who'd angered someone powerful. There was Frode, a farmer who'd refused to give up his land. There was Thyra, a merchant who'd complained when nobles took goods without paying. There was Sten, a young soldier who'd reported corruption in his unit. And there were other women. So many women. Gaida, accused of witchcraft because she knew healing herbs better than the village priest. Inga, accused of adultery by a husband who wanted a younger wife. Solveig, accused of theft because she'd demanded wages her employer refused to pay. We were all enemies of powerful men. But we weren't enemies of the kingdom. I started talking to them through the walls. In whispers that carried through stone and darkness, we told each other our stories. And a pattern emerged. A pattern that would later save my life. The kingdom wasn't just rotting from corruption. It was rotting from silencing half its people. Women who saw problems couldn't speak about them. Women who had solutions couldn't propose them. Women who witnessed crimes couldn't testify. Women who were victimized couldn't seek justice. Half the kingdom's wisdom was being thrown away because it came from the wrong bodies. On the night before my trial, an old woman was thrown into the cell next to mine. Her name was Revna, and she'd once been an advisor to the previous queen before falling out of favor. She was dying, I could hear it in her rattling breath, but she had one last gift to give. "Girl," she whispered through the wall. "Tomorrow you face the king. They'll expect you to weep and beg and play the weak woman. Don't." "What do you mean?" "The king has seen 1,000 weeping women. He's learned to ignore tears the way he's learned to ignore truth. They all look the same to him. They all die the same. Then what should I do? Speak to him as an equal. Not as a subject to a king, and certainly not as a woman to a man. Speak to him as one human to another who cares about the kingdom. Make him see what everyone else hides from him. You'll die either way, girl, but you might die having changed everything for the women who come after." Revna passed away that night. I heard her final breath echo through the stone, and I sat in the darkness thinking about her words until the guards came for me at dawn. The throne room. They didn't remove the chains. That was the first humiliation. When you're brought before the king for treason, they want you to look like the criminal they say you are. So I shuffled into the throne room in ankle chains, my wrists bound, my clothes still filthy from 3 weeks in the dungeon, my hair tangled and unwashed. The throne room was vast, a soaring space of carved pillars and ancient banners, filled with the most powerful people in Denmark. Jarls stood along the walls in their fine clothes. Warriors lined the back, hands on sword hilts. Scribes sat ready to record my condemnation. And at the center of it all, elevated on a platform of stone, sat King Harald. He was older than I expected, maybe 50 winters, with gray threading through his dark beard. His eyes were sharp, but there was something else there, a tiredness, maybe, or a loneliness. This was a man who carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, who made decisions that meant life or death for thousands. Jarl Esker stood beside the throne, wearing a smile that promised vengeance. The herald announced me. Astrid, daughter of Ragnar the blacksmith, accused of treason against the crown, blasphemy against the Jarls, sedition against the peace of the realm, and defiance of natural law. That last charge. Defiance of natural law, that was code. It meant I'd forgotten my place as a woman. In that moment, I understood how small I was supposed to be. How powerless. A blacksmith's daughter standing before the accumulated might of Denmark's ruling class. All of them waiting to watch me grovel and die. All of them expecting me to cry, to beg, to prove that women were exactly as weak as they'd always claimed. King Harald studied me for a long moment. his expression unreadable. "The charges are serious," he said finally. His voice was deep, measured, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. "Jarl Esker tells me you publicly accused him of theft, defied his authority, and forgot your place as a woman. What do you say to these charges?" This was the moment. I could defend myself, explain that Esker was extorting old Signa, argue that I was protecting a widow. I could throw myself on the king's mercy, weep prettily, and hope for leniency because I was just a confused girl who didn't know better. But I thought of Revna's words. I thought of Gyda and Inga and Solveig and all the other women rotting in cells below, guilty only of being female in a world that hated them for it. I thought of my mother, dying because no one would listen. I thought of my sister, beaten because she had no recourse. And I made a choice. "Your Majesty," I said, my voice steady despite the chains, "I'm going to tell you something no one else in this room will, because the men are too corrupt to speak plainly, and the women aren't allowed to speak at all. So before you execute me, listen." A shocked murmur rippled through the court. Esker stepped forward, his face purple with rage. "You will be silent and accept your—" "Let her speak," King Harald said quietly. The room fell silent. The king leaned forward slightly on his throne. "You have my attention, blacksmith's daughter. Use it wisely." The 7 words. Took a breath. This was it. The moment that would either mean nothing or mean everything. "Your kingdom is being stolen from you." Those were the 7 words. Simple. Direct. True. The court erupted. Jarls shouted over each other, demanding my immediate execution. Warriors moved forward, ready to drag me away. But King Harald raised his hand, and somehow, impossibly, the chaos stopped. "Explain," he said. So I did. "Your Majesty, 3 weeks ago, I watched Jarl Esker extort the last coins from a widow who'd already paid your tax. She has 5 children. She'd starved herself to pay what the crown required. And he demanded more, not for the kingdom but for his 3rd manor house. When I called it theft, he called it treason. And I'm here before you now because I named the crime correctly." "Lies!" Esker shouted. "This woman seeks to—" "How much do you pay in tax, Jarl Esker?" I asked, turning to face him directly. "How dare you question me, woman?" "No," King Harald said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Answer her, Esker. How much do you pay?" The Jarl's face went red, then white. The nobility are exempt from common taxes, Your Majesty. This is well known. We pay in service to the crown in nothing," I interrupted. "You pay in nothing. While my father gives half of what he earns to the crown, while old Signa starves her children to meet your quotas, you pay nothing and demand more. And you call it service to the king." I turned back to Harald. "Your Majesty, I've spent 3 weeks in your dungeon. Do you know who I met there? A farmer whose land was taken. A merchant who complained when soldiers stole from her. A soldier who reported corruption. And women, so many women. Accused of witchcraft for knowing medicine. Accused of theft for demanding fair pay. Accused of adultery by husbands who wanted younger wives. These people aren't traitors. They're the only honest people in your kingdom. And they're the ones in chains." The throne room had gone eerily quiet. Every eye was on the king. "You speak boldly for a woman in chains," Harald said. But his tone had shifted. The automatic anger was gone, replaced by something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or recognition. "I speak boldly because I'm already dead, Your Majesty. You're going to execute me regardless of what I say. So I might as well die having told the truth. But I need you to hear it, because you're the only one who can change anything." "And what would you have me change?" "Everything," I said. "The system is broken. Your jarls tell you the people are prosperous while they starve. They tell you the realm is peaceful while they oppress. They tell you they serve the crown while they enrich themselves. And you let half your kingdom, all the women, be silenced, beaten, and dismissed. You're throwing away half your wisdom, half your strength, half your potential. You sit here thinking you're merciless, but you're not. You're blind. And they've made you blind on purpose. Another murmur from the court, but softer this time. I saw some of the younger nobles exchanging glances. Even some of the warriors looked uncomfortable. King Harald stood. When a king stands, it means something. The entire court held its breath. You accuse my jarls of corruption, of lying to me, of stealing from the crown and calling it governance. And you accuse me of what? Wasting the talents of women. He descended the steps from his throne, walking toward me slowly. These are serious accusations, blacksmith's daughter. If you're wrong, you die screaming. If you're right. He stopped a few feet in front of me, and for the first time I saw his face up close. There was intelligence there, and pain, and something that looked like hope struggling against cynicism. If you're right, he continued, then I've been a fool. And worse than a fool. I've been a tool in the hands of men who use my name to cause suffering. So tell me, Astrid, daughter of Ragnar, how would you prove these accusations? The proof. This was my chance. My only chance. Send someone you trust, someone who isn't a jarl, into the lower city. Have them dress as a commoner and walk through the market. Let them listen to what people say when they think no one with power is listening. Let them see how your guards treat the merchants, especially the women merchants. Let them watch what happens when taxes are collected. And let them visit the dungeons and hear the stories of the women imprisoned there. And what will they find? They'll find that the taxes recorded in your ledgers aren't the taxes collected in your streets. They'll find that soldiers steal in your name. They'll find that your jarls live like kings while your people live like prisoners. They'll find that women are punished for crimes they didn't commit because powerful men find it convenient. They'll find that everything I've said is true. Esker finally found his voice. Your Majesty, this is absurd. You would take the word of a hysterical woman over your loyal. Hysterical? I turned to him. I haven't raised my voice once. I haven't wept. I haven't begged. I've stated facts and proposed evidence. If that's hysteria, then what do you call your screaming just now? Several warriors actually laughed at that. Even a few nobles hid smiles. King Harald turned to look at Esker. Tell me, Jarl, how many manor houses do you own? 3, Your Majesty, but on what income? Your stipend from the crown would barely pay for one. My family lands produce. Your family lands were no larger than any other jarls 10 years ago. Yet somehow you've tripled your holdings. Explain that to me. For the first time, I saw real fear in Esker's eyes. He looked around the room for support, but the other jarls were suddenly very interested in the floor. Your Majesty, There have been investments, profitable ventures. Name one. Silence. King Harald turned back to me. You've made your point, blacksmith's daughter. But accusations and proof are different things. I need more than words. Then look at the records, I said. Your scribes keep ledgers of what's paid to the crown, yes? Compare those to what the tax collectors actually bring in. The difference is what your jarls are keeping for themselves. And look at the dungeon records. Look at how many women are imprisoned on vague charges that benefit specific men. Witchcraft accusations from priests who wanted their land. Adultery charges from husbands who wanted new wives. Theft accusations from employers who didn't want to pay wages. That would require auditing every jarl in the kingdom, one of the advisors said. It would take months, and it would insult. Then it insults, Harald said sharply. My treasury has been emptier year by year while my taxes grow heavier. I've asked why, and I'm told the people are lazy, that they hide their wealth, that they resist their duties. But what if the truth is simpler? What if the wealth is being stolen before it reaches the crown? He walked back to his throne, but he didn't sit. He stood there, one hand on the arm of his chair, looking at every face in the room. Astrid, daughter of Ragnar, has accused the nobility of this kingdom of systematic theft. Of turning the crown's justice into a weapon for their own enrichment. Of making me a tyrant in the eyes of my people while they profit from the hatred they create. And she has accused me of wasting half my kingdom's potential by treating women as property rather than people. His voice grew harder. And looking at your faces right now, I see a great deal of guilt and very little outrage. Your Majesty, another Jarl ventured carefully, even if there have been irregularities, this woman still committed treason. She defied lawful authority. She told the truth, Harald said. And apparently that's treason now. When did truth become the enemy of the crown? When did justice become whatever enriches the nobility? When did I stop being a king and become a tyrant? The silence that followed was absolute. Turn. King Harald looked at me for a long moment, and I saw a decision forming behind his eyes. Then he did something that shocked everyone in that throne room. He knelt. Not all the way. A king doesn't prostrate himself, but he took a knee, bringing his eyes level with mine. Astrid, daughter of Ragnar, he said, I owe you an apology. You did what no one else in this kingdom has had the courage to do. You told me the truth, expecting death, asking nothing for yourself. You defended a widow and challenged corruption, and for that, you've been in chains for 3 weeks. He reached out and with his own hands unlocked my shackles. The chains fell away from my wrists, hitting the floor with a sound like thunder. You are free, he said. More than that, you are honored. Because today, you've saved me from becoming the monster my enemies wanted me to be. Then he stood and turned to face his court. His voice rang out like iron on iron. From this day forward, there will be an audit. Every jarl, every tax collector, every official who handles the crown's coin will be investigated. Anyone found guilty of theft will face the same justice as any common criminal, because before the law, we are all common. There will be no more exemptions for nobility. No more taking without accounting. No more calling theft taxation and oppression order. Your Majesty, Esker said desperately, you cannot mean to. Jarl Esker, you are removed from your position, effective immediately. You will be confined to your quarters while your finances are examined. If you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear. If you've stolen from the crown, you'll return every coin, and you'll face justice like anyone else. Esker's face went ashen. Several other jarls looked like they might be sick. But your Majesty, one of them protested, the nobility must be treated with. The nobility will be treated with the same fairness as everyone else, Harald said. No more, no less. If that frightens you, examine your conscience. He turned to his captain of the guard. Sven, I want you to select a dozen of your most trusted soldiers. They'll conduct the investigation, Astrid suggested. They'll go into the lower city in common clothes, watch the tax collectors, listen to the people. And they'll review every case of a woman imprisoned in the last 5 years. I want truth, not politics. Yes, Your Majesty. Then Harald turned back to me. Astrid, I have a question for you. You've seen corruption from the bottom of society. You've experienced injustice as a woman in a world controlled by men. You've spent 3 weeks thinking about what's wrong with this kingdom. So tell me, what should I do? If you were king, how would you fix this? Every person in that room was looking at me now. A blacksmith's daughter, standing before the throne, being asked by the king himself how to rule. I thought about my mother, about my sister, about every woman I'd met in those dungeons, all the women just trying to survive in a system designed to crush them. Your Majesty, I said slowly, the problem isn't the laws. Many of the laws are good. The problem is threefold. First, powerful people can ignore the laws while powerless people can't. Second, half your kingdom, all the women, have no voice in making or enforcing those laws. And third, many laws exist specifically to keep women powerless. And how would you fix that? First, make sure every law applies to everyone equally, from the lowest farmer to the highest jarl, from the poorest woman to the richest man. Because the moment you allow exceptions, you create corruption. Second, create a council that includes common people, and that includes women. You need farmers and blacksmiths and merchants and weavers, people who know what life is actually like in your kingdom, to advise you. And you need women's voices because women see things men miss, experience things men don't face, and have wisdom that gets ignored simply because of who speaks it. Third, review every law that treats women as property or prevents them from defending themselves, owning property, seeking justice, or participating in society. Ask yourself, does this law protect people, or does it just protect men's power over women? One of the jarls scoffed. Women on the king's council. That's absurd. They have no education, no understanding of. I work a forge, I said, cutting him off. I can read and calculate because my father taught me. I understand commerce because I help run our business. I understand justice because I've experienced injustice. And I understand this kingdom because I live in it, not above it. What I don't understand is why having a womb makes my mind less valuable than yours. Several of the warriors along the wall smiled at that. Even some of the younger nobles looked like they were suppressing grins. And I noticed, there were a few noblewomen in the room, standing in the shadows where women were expected to stay. They were watching me with something that looked like hope. King Harald nodded slowly. A council that includes women. To balance the nobility. Keep me honest. To bring wisdom I've been discarding. He seemed to be testing the idea, turning it over in his mind. It would be unprecedented. So was kneeling to unlock a woman's chains, I said. But you did it anyway because it was right. The proclamation. What happened next became legend. King Harald, standing before his assembled court, issued a proclamation that would change Denmark forever. He called it the Equal Justice Decree, and he had his scribes write it down immediately, before anyone could talk him out of it. The decree established several principles. First, that all laws applied equally to every person in the kingdom, regardless of rank, wealth, or sex. A noble who stole would be punished the same as a commoner who stole. A man who beat his wife would face justice the same as a wife who harmed her husband. Second, that a new council would be formed, the People's Council, consisting of representatives elected by the common folk of each region, including women. This council would advise the king on laws and policies, ensuring that the voices of all people reached the throne. Third, that all nobles would pay taxes proportional to their wealth, just like everyone else. No more exemptions. No more special treatment. Fourth, that any official accused of corruption would be investigated by a special court that included both nobles and commoners, both men and women, ensuring fairness from all sides. Fifth, that women would have the right to own property, engage in trade, testify in court, and seek justice for crimes committed against them. That accusations of witchcraft would require actual evidence, not just the word of a man who wanted a woman's land. That marriage would require the consent of both parties, not just the arrangement of fathers. And sixth, this was the part that made me realize Harald was truly serious about change. That any person, man or woman, could petition the king directly once a month, without going through nobles or jarls or any intermediary. The king would hear directly from all his people. When the scribes finished reading the decree, the throne room erupted in chaos. Some jarls shouted their approval. Others looked like they wanted to start a rebellion right there. The warriors seemed uncertain. But the noblewomen in the shadows, they stepped forward into the light, tears streaming down their faces. "This is madness," one of the older jarls declared. "You'll destabilize the entire kingdom. Women will forget their place. The natural order will collapse." "Good," Harald said simply. "If the natural order requires half my people to be voiceless, beaten, and dismissed, then the natural order is my enemy. I'm the king, not them. And I've just remembered what that means." He turned to me once more. "Astrid, I'm appointing you to the People's Council. In fact, I'm making you its first chair. You'll help me find other honest people from across the kingdom to serve alongside you. People who care more about truth than power. And at least half of them must be women. Your Majesty, I'm just a blacksmith's daughter. I don't know how to. You knew how to tell me the truth when everyone else was lying. You knew how to risk your life for a principle. You knew how to see what was wrong and name it clearly. Those are exactly the skills I need. He smiled slightly. Besides, you've already proven you're not afraid of me. That's more valuable than you know. The aftermath. What followed was the most chaotic month in Danish history. The audits revealed that nearly 2/3 of the kingdom's tax revenue was being skimmed by corrupt officials. Jarl Esker alone had stolen enough to feed his entire province for a year. When confronted with the evidence, he broke down and confessed, implicating dozens of other nobles in similar schemes. The review of women's imprisonment was even more damning. Hundreds of women had been locked away on false charges. Gyda, accused of witchcraft. Her accuser was a priest who'd wanted her land, and documents proved he'd bought it for a fraction of its value the day after her arrest. Inga, accused of adultery. Her husband had been having an affair and wanted a divorce without returning her dowry. Solveig, accused of theft. Her employer had simply refused to pay her wages and imprisoned her when she complained. They were all released, and their accusers faced the same justice they'd inflicted on innocent women. 7 jarls were stripped of their titles. 14 tax collectors were imprisoned. 2 priests were defrocked. And the treasury, once nearly empty, suddenly began to fill as stolen wealth was returned to the crown. But King Harald didn't keep it. That was the move that transformed him from a tyrant into a legend. He took half of the recovered wealth and distributed it back to the provinces that had been overtaxed. He used the other half to reduce taxes across the board, making life genuinely easier for the common people. And the People's Council, which I found myself suddenly leading, became the most powerful force for change in the kingdom. We weren't professional politicians. We were a farmer named Dagmar who understood crop seasons. A fisherman named Leif who knew the coast trade. A healer named Revna's daughter, Thyra, who knew medicine. A soldier named Kettle who'd served for 20 years and seen corruption from the inside. And we were women. So many women. Weavers who understood the cloth trade. Midwives who understood childbirth and children's needs. Merchants who understood commerce. Teachers who understood education. Mothers who understood what families actually needed to thrive. We were ordinary people given extraordinary power, the power to speak truth to the throne and know we'd be heard. The changes happened faster than anyone expected. Within 3 months, the kingdom was transformed. Crime dropped because people no longer needed to steal to survive. Trade increased because merchants, including women merchants, weren't being extorted. Even military morale improved because soldiers were finally being paid fairly and held accountable for their actions. Women started appearing in public spaces in ways they never had before. Not just shopping or serving but speaking, trading, deciding. Women opened businesses. Women testified in courts. Women owned property in their own names. It wasn't perfect. There was resistance. Some men refused to accept the changes and tried to maintain the old ways. But now women had recourse. They could report abuse and be heard. They could seek justice and receive it. King Harald changed too. The weariness I'd seen in his eyes lifted. He started walking through the lower city himself, talking to people. All people, men and women both. Listening to their concerns. He discovered that he'd been isolated by design. Kept ignorant by the very people who were supposed to serve him. They made me a tyrant, he told me one day, months after that fateful day in the throne room. They used my name to commit crimes, then blamed me when people suffered. And they convinced me that half my kingdom didn't matter because they were women. I let them because I trusted the wrong people. You're fixing it now, I said. No, he replied. We're fixing it. You, me, the council, the honest officials we found, all the women finally being heard. This isn't one man's work. It's the work of everyone who chooses truth over convenience. The lesson. People sometimes ask me what I learned from that day. The day I was dragged before the king in chains and somehow walked away free. I learned that power fears truth more than it fears violence. Esker wasn't afraid when I picked up a hammer. He was afraid when I named what he was doing as theft. Every corrupt system depends on silence, on people being too afraid or too hopeless to speak plainly about what's wrong. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. I was terrified standing before that throne. But courage is being afraid and speaking anyway, because the truth matters more than your safety. I learned that change requires someone to go first. Someone has to be the one who speaks up, who calls out the injustice, who refuses to bow even when everyone else is bowing. Dangerous. Might cost everything. But it's the only way anything ever gets better. And I learned that most tyrants aren't evil, they're deceived. King Harald wasn't a cruel man by nature. He was a good man fed lies by corrupt advisors, isolated from truth by people who benefited from his ignorance. When someone finally broke through that wall of lies, he changed everything. But most importantly, I learned that being a woman in a world designed to silence women means you have nothing to lose. They already assume you're weak. They already dismiss your voice. They already think you don't matter. So you might as well speak the truth. Because you're going to be punished for being a woman anyway. You might as well be punished for being a woman who changed the world. The ripple. The changes in Denmark rippled outward. Other kingdoms heard about the Equal Justice Decree and the People's Council that included women. Some mocked it as weakness. But others, especially the women in those kingdoms, began asking questions. Why don't we have a voice in how we're governed? Why are the laws different for men than for women? Why do men who beat their wives face no consequences? Within a decade, 3 neighboring kingdoms had established their own versions of the People's Council with women's representation. Within 20 years, it was the standard across Scandinavia. The idea was simple, powerful, and once women knew it was possible, it became inevitable. My father lived long enough to see me appointed as the royal advocate, essentially the voice of the common people, especially women, in all matters of state. The first time I came home to visit him after the appointment, he just stood there in the forge, hammer in hand, tears running down his face. "I taught you to work metal," he said quietly. "I didn't know I was teaching you to reshape a kingdom." "You taught me more than metalwork," I replied. "You taught me that a woman's hands could do anything a man's could. That my mind was as good as any man's. That I mattered, even though the world said I didn't. Everything I said to the king came from you, even if you never said it out loud." He hugged me then, something he'd rarely done when I was growing up. And I realized that change doesn't just come from dramatic moments in throne rooms. It comes from every parent who teaches their daughters to value themselves, every worker who refuses to accept injustice, every person who treats women with dignity even when they don't have to. Old Signa, the widow whose suffering sparked everything, became one of the most respected voices on the People's Council. She understood poverty and motherhood in a way that no noble ever could, and her practical wisdom saved the kingdom from several bad policies that sounded good to educated men but would have hurt the families who could least afford it. My sister, the one whose husband beat her, she left him. In the old days, she would have had nowhere to go, no way to support herself, no recourse. But under the new laws, she divorced him, kept her property, and opened a small tavern that became one of the most successful businesses in the lower city. She hired other women who'd escaped bad situations, giving them work and dignity. Esker spent 5 years in prison, not the dungeon where I'd been held, but a work camp where nobles convicted of crimes learned what honest labor felt like. When he was released, he was a changed man. Humbled, honest. He actually came to me and apologized, not because he expected forgiveness, but because he finally understood what he'd done. I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because carrying hatred is exhausting, and I had better things to do with my energy. The price of truth. I won't pretend everything was perfect. Change creates chaos, and chaos hurts even when it's necessary. Some of the displaced nobles genuinely believed women were inferior. They fought back, not with swords, but with politics and propaganda and attempted sabotage. There were 3 assassination attempts on King Harald in the first 2 years. All were stopped, but each one reminded us how much some people hated what we were building. There were attempts on my life too. Someone poisoned my food once. A woman, actually, a noble woman who believed I was destroying the natural order. Another time, a group of men who'd lost power because of the reforms tried to drag me from my quarters in the palace. I survived because I'd learned to be cautious, And because Harald had assigned guards to protect the council members, including women guards, trained and armed and just as capable as the men. The price of speaking truth is that liars will try to silence you. The price of building something better is that those who benefited from what was worse will fight you every step of the way. And the price of being a woman who changes the world is that you become a target for everyone who thinks women shouldn't have that power. But we persisted. Because we'd glimpsed what was possible. A kingdom where justice was real, where power served people instead of oppressing them, where women had a voice in their own governance. Once you've seen that possibility, you can't unsee it. The greatest change. But the greatest change wasn't in laws or councils or tax policies. It was in the women themselves. When I walked through the lower city a year after that day in the throne room, women walked differently. They stood straighter. They made eye contact. They spoke openly about problems instead of whispering in fear. Mothers told their daughters they could be anything. Not just wives and mothers, though those were honored roles, but also merchants, craftswomen, scholars, soldiers, whatever they had the skill and desire to become. Girls who'd grown up believing they were lesser started asking questions. Why? Became a common word among young women. Why should I marry someone I don't love? Why can't I learn this trade? Why is my brother's opinion more valuable than mine? And instead of being punished for their questions, they were answered. Education expanded to include girls because Harald realized that an educated population made better decisions than an ignorant one. Schools opened that taught girls alongside boys. The daughters of blacksmiths and farmers learned to read and think and dream. One of those children was my niece, Thyra, named after the healer who'd been one of the first women on the council. She was 10 years old when I was dragged to the throne room. She grew up in the kingdom we built, and she never knew what it was like to live in fear simply for being female. When she was 25, she became the first woman appointed to the royal court as a judge. "You changed the world, Aunt," she told me once. "No," I said. "I just spoke up. The world changed itself once women knew they could." Years later. I'm an old woman now, writing this from my quarters in the palace that once held me prisoner. King Harald passed away 5 years ago, and his daughter Freya rules now. Yes, his daughter. Under the old laws, the crown would have passed to a distant male cousin. But under the new laws, competence mattered more than gender. And Freya is a brilliant ruler, raised to value truth and justice because her father learned those lessons so painfully. The chains that once bound my wrists hang on the wall of the council chamber as a reminder. Every new council member sees them during their first meeting, and we tell them the story. Not to glorify me but to remind them why we exist. Those chains, I tell them, represent every voice that was silenced, every truth that was suppressed, every woman who was punished for refusing to be powerless. We wear them metaphorically every day we serve on this council. And our job is to make sure no woman, no person, has to wear them literally ever again. The kingdom isn't perfect. Nowhere is. But it's better. It's more just. Men are still powerful, but they're accountable. The wealthy are still wealthy, but they contribute their share. And women like my mother, like my sister, like every woman who was told she didn't matter, they have dignity now. They have voice. They have choice. They have hope. The real power. You know what the real power was that day in the throne room? It wasn't that I was eloquent. I wasn't. I was a terrified blacksmith's daughter who could barely keep my voice from shaking. It wasn't that I had some master plan or brilliant strategy. I didn't. I was making it up as I went, saying whatever came to mind, fully expecting each word to be my last. The real power was simply this. I told the truth when everyone else was lying. And I refused to perform weakness just because I was a woman. That's it. That's the secret that changed a kingdom. In a room full of silver tongues and political calculation, surrounded by people who'd spent their entire lives learning how to manipulate language and obscure meaning, I just said what was real. And that simple honesty cut through decades of corruption like a blade through silk. Because here's what I've learned in all my years since that day. Lies require constant energy to maintain. You have to remember what you said, keep your story straight, make sure all the pieces fit together. Lies are exhausting. But truth. Truth is effortless. You just say what is. You don't have to remember anything because you're not making anything up. You don't have to coordinate with anyone because reality doesn't change based on who's looking at it. The only hard part is being willing to face the consequences. And if you're a woman, if you're already facing consequences just for existing in your body, then you have nothing to lose. The moment everything changed. People always ask me, what was the exact moment you knew you'd won? When did you realize the king was actually listening? And I tell them it wasn't when he unlocked my chains. It wasn't when he announced the reforms. It wasn't even when he knelt. It was earlier than that. It was the moment when he told Esker to answer my question. Because in that moment, a king chose to let a woman challenge a jarl's authority. A man with absolute power decided that a woman's question deserved an answer. A ruler who'd been surrounded by men his entire life acknowledged that female wisdom might matter. That's when I knew we had a chance. See, patriarchy doesn't survive questions. It doesn't survive women being taken seriously. It doesn't survive the moment when powerful men admit that women might be right. Harald asked. He listened. And when the evidence supported what I was saying, he had the courage to admit that an entire system built on silencing women was wrong. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing a powerful man can do. Acknowledge that women deserve power too, and actively work to share it. I've seen so many leaders since then, in Denmark and beyond, who couldn't do that. Who'd rather watch their kingdoms burn than admit women are equals. Who'd rather maintain their privilege than build something better. Harald was different. Not because he was perfect, he wasn't. But because when confronted with truth, he chose to change. The letters. In the years that followed, I received letters. Thousands of them. From every corner of the kingdom and beyond. Women wrote to tell me their stories, to ask advice, to share their own moments of speaking truth to power. A young woman named Inga wrote to tell me she'd left her abusive husband. She'd been terrified, she said, but she'd remembered the story of the blacksmith's daughter and found the courage. Under the new laws, she kept her property and her children. Her ex-husband faced justice for his violence. A girl named Solveig wrote to say she told her father she wanted to learn his trade instead of marrying the man he'd chosen. He'd been angry at first, but she'd stood firm. Now she was the finest carpenter in her village, and her father was proud. A mother named Revna wrote about teaching her daughters that their voices mattered. All 3 daughters grew up to be council members in their regions, representing women who'd never been represented before. These stories taught me something profound. I hadn't just changed Denmark's government. I'd given women permission to speak their truth. I'd shown them that it was possible to stand up, to call out wrong, to demand better, and not just survive but thrive. That's the thing about courage. It's contagious. One woman's bravery makes it easier for the next woman to be brave. And then the next. And the next. Until suddenly, an entire society shifts. The cost of silence. But I also received letters from women who waited too long. Who saw injustice and said nothing. Who watched other women suffer and told themselves it wasn't their problem. Who kept their heads down and hoped someone else would speak up. Those letters haunt me more than the threats from angry nobles ever did. A mother wrote to tell me she'd watched her daughter be abused by a powerful man. She'd said nothing, hoping it would stop on its own. Didn't. Her daughter took her own life. Now the mother would give anything to go back and be brave when it mattered. A woman wrote about knowing that her neighbor was being beaten by her husband. She'd told herself it wasn't her place to interfere, that it was a private matter. By the time she finally spoke up, it was too late. The neighbor didn't survive. A midwife wrote about watching women die in childbirth because priests wouldn't let her use the techniques she knew worked. She'd stayed silent because challenging the church was dangerous. Now those faces haunted her dreams every night. These letters broke my heart. Not because I judged those women. Who am I to judge? I'd lived 23 years keeping my head down before I finally spoke up. But because they showed me the real cost of silence. Evil doesn't need supporters to win. Just needs good people to say nothing. Every day we watch injustice and convince ourselves it's not our problem, someone suffers. Every time we see wrong and look away, we give oppression permission to grow. Every moment we choose safety over truth, we make the world a little worse. And for women specifically, every time we stay silent about our own oppression, we teach the next generation that silence is survival. We pass down trauma. We make our daughters believe they don't matter. I didn't want to speak up that day in the street. I wanted to go back to my forge, finish my work and stay safe. But I couldn't. Because once you see suffering, once you witness injustice, you can't unsee it. Pretending you don't see it doesn't make it go away. It just makes you complicit. The throne room today. The throne room looks different now. Queen Freya sits on the throne. And that alone would have been impossible 50 years ago. To her right is the High Council of Nobles and Jarls, much smaller than it used to be, and filled with people who've proven their integrity, including several women. To her left is the People's Council, common folk like me who speak for those without power, and half of us are women. Every major decision requires input from both sides. Every law must be reviewed by both councils. Every appointment must be approved by representatives of all the people. Men and women, noble and common. It's messy. It's slower than the old way. There are arguments and disagreements and compromises that satisfy no one completely. And it's beautiful. 'Cause that mess is democracy. That slowness is fairness. Those arguments are different voices being heard instead of silenced. The throne room is no longer a place where men dictate and women obey. It's a place where the entire kingdom, in all its diversity, all its disagreement, all its complexity, comes together to decide its future. I stood in that room last week for the anniversary celebration. 50 years since the day I was dragged there in chains. And as I looked around at the jarls and farmers, the merchants and soldiers, the men and women and old and young all working together, I felt something I never expected to feel. Pride. Not in myself, but in what we'd all built together. In the kingdom that chose justice over tradition, truth over comfort, equality over hierarchy. What I want you to know, if you're listening to this story, wherever you are, whatever your circumstances, I want you to understand something important. You don't have to be special to change the world. You don't need to be educated or eloquent or powerful or connected. You don't need permission from anyone. You just need to tell the truth when everyone else is lying. You just need to stand up when everyone else is bowing. You just need to say, "This is wrong," when everyone else is pretending it's fine. That's all I did. I was nobody. A blacksmith's daughter with calloused hands and no education beyond learning to work metal. I had no plan, no strategy, no powerful friends. I just opened my mouth and said what was real. And it changed everything. Because here's the secret they don't want you to know. The powerful are only powerful because we let them be. The oppressors only rule because we stay silent. Men only dominate women because women haven't yet found the courage to demand equality in large enough numbers. Every oppressive system, every patriarchy, every injustice exists because good people haven't yet found the courage to speak up. Not because they're weak. Not because they don't care. But because they're afraid. And that's okay. Fear is natural. I was terrified. My voice shook. My hands trembled. I expected to die. But I spoke anyway. And you can too. The invitation. Look around your world right now. What injustice do you see? What oppression do you witness? What wrong have you been ignoring because speaking up feels too dangerous, too hard, too hopeless? If you're a woman, what inequality are you accepting? What disrespect are you enduring? What dreams are you abandoning because someone told you women can't do that? If you're a man, what injustice against women are you witnessing and ignoring? What privilege are you enjoying while others suffer? What silence are you maintaining because speaking up would cost you something? That's your moment. That's your throne room. That's your chance to be the person who goes first. Maybe it's at your workplace, where women are paid less or passed over for promotions. Maybe it's in your family, where daughters are treated differently than sons. Maybe it's in your community, where women's voices are dismissed or silenced. Maybe it's in your own relationship, where you're accepting treatment you know is wrong. Whatever it is, you know what it is. You've known for a while. You've been hoping someone else would handle it, that it would resolve itself, that speaking up wouldn't be necessary. But it is necessary. Because silence never fixed anything. Because oppression flourishes when good people do nothing. Because someone has to go first. Why not you? Why not now? I'm not saying it will be easy. It wasn't easy for me. I spent 3 weeks in a dungeon. Faced death. I risked everything. But I'm also not saying it will be impossible. 'Cause I did it. A nobody blacksmith's daughter changed a kingdom by speaking 7 words of truth. If I could do it, you can too. The legacy. Do you know what they call the period after King Harald's reforms? Historians call it the Golden Age of Denmark. 100 years of prosperity, justice, and peace. A century where Denmark became the model other kingdoms aspired to. And it all started because one woman refused to watch a widow be robbed in the street. That's how change works. Not through grand gestures by extraordinary people. But through ordinary people. Especially women who've been told they don't matter. Doing the right thing in small moments, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. My father died thinking I was special, that I'd done something he could never do. But he was wrong. He'd done it every day of his life. He'd been honest in his work, fair in his dealings, kind to everyone including women. He'd raised a daughter who knew the difference between right and wrong and cared enough to act on it. That's the real heroism. Not the dramatic moment in the throne room. But the decades of quiet integrity that made that moment possible. Old Signa died at 93, surrounded by her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. All of them living in a kingdom where widows don't have to fear being robbed by the powerful, where women own property and control their own lives. At her funeral, people came from all over Denmark to pay respects. Not because she'd done anything dramatic, but because she'd represented everyone who'd ever been powerless, and her survival, her thriving, symbolized the kingdom's transformation. My sister died peacefully in her bed, surrounded by the daughters and granddaughters who ran her successful tavern business. None of them ever knew what it was like to be trapped in a violent marriage with no escape. None of them ever accepted being beaten. That alone made everything worthwhile. Queen Freya rules with wisdom and strength, proving every day that women are just as capable of leadership as men. Her daughter will inherit the throne after her, and her daughter after that, because competence matters more than gender now. The question. So here's my question for you as we come to the end of this story. What will they call your age? When people look back on this time, when historians write about this moment in history, what will they say? Will they say it was an age when women saw injustice and spoke up? When ordinary women found the courage to tell the truth? When we chose to build something better even though it was hard? Or will they say it was an age when we saw what was wrong and did nothing? When we prioritized our comfort over others' suffering? When we had the chance to change things and let it slip away? The choice is yours. It's always been yours. You can keep your head down. Stay safe. Hope someone else handles it. Watch the world stay unjust and tell yourself there was nothing you could do. Or you can speak up. Take the risk. Be the one who goes first. Give other women permission to be brave by being brave yourself. I'm an old woman now. My part in this story is nearly done. But yours is just beginning. The chains on the wall. Every morning when I walk into the council chamber, I touch those chains on the wall. The iron is cold and rough, stained with rust and old blood. My blood, mixed with the blood of everyone else who was ever silenced for speaking truth, especially women. I touch them to remember. To honor those who weren't as lucky as me. To remind myself why we do this work of justice, even when it's exhausting, even when it feels hopeless, even when the patriarchy we fought yesterday grows back tomorrow. But mostly, I touch them to remind myself that they're empty now. That I walked away from them. That speaking truth didn't kill me, it freed me. And it freed every other woman who'd been chained by fear and silence, and the belief that we didn't matter. Those chains are empty. And they'll stay empty as long as women keep having the courage to speak. My final words. If I could go back to that morning when Eska rode through our street, knowing everything that would follow, The dungeon, the fear, the assassination attempts, the years of struggle, would I still speak up? 1,000 times yes. Because I got to see old Cygnus smile without fear. I got to watch my niece become a judge. I got to see my sister build a life of dignity and independence. I got to help build a kingdom where women mattered. I got to give thousands of women permission to find their own courage. I got to live in a world I'd helped make better. For women, for everyone. That's worth any price. Worth any risk. Worth any sacrifice. And you can have that too. Not the specific story, your story will be your own. But the feeling of knowing you made a difference. Of knowing you stood up when it mattered. Of knowing you chose courage over comfort and truth over silence. That feeling is available to any woman willing to pay the price of speaking up. The throne room of your life is waiting. The powerful who need to hear truth are all around you. The injustice that needs naming is right in front of you. And the chains of fear and silence and the belief that women don't matter, they can be broken. Right now. Today. All you have to do is speak. The true ending. You want to know how this story really ends. Not with my death or the kingdom's future or any of that. The real ending is what happens next in your life. Do you close this story and go back to your routine, inspired for a moment but unchanged? Do you think that's a nice story about someone else's courage and move on? Or do you let it change you? Do you look at the injustice you've been ignoring and finally name it? Do you find your voice and use it even though your hands are shaking? That's the ending. Not here in medieval Denmark, but there wherever you are right now. Because stories aren't just entertainment. They're not just ways to pass time. Stories are invitations. They're maps. They're mirrors that show us who we could be if we were brave enough. I'm showing you who you could be. Someone who matters. Someone who makes a difference. Someone who looks back on their life without regret, knowing they stood up when it counted. The chains are real. The fear is real. The risk is real. But so is the reward. So is the change. So is the better world waiting on the other side of your courage. 3 weeks in a dungeon. 7 words of truth. 1 kingdom transformed. What could your courage create? One last thing. They sometimes bring children to meet me now, in my final years. Their parents want them to meet the woman from the stories, the blacksmith's daughter who changed Denmark. And every time I kneel down, my old knees creaking with the effort, and I tell them the same thing, especially to the girls. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who spoke up one time when it mattered. And if I can do that, so can you. Not someday. Not when you're older. Not when you're ready. But right now, in whatever small way is available to you. Be honest. Be kind. Be brave. Don't let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter because you're a girl. That's a lie. Your voice matters as much as anyone's. Then I show them the scars on my wrists where the chains cut deep. I let them touch the marks, feel the raised tissue, understand that courage has a cost. But then I show them the kingdom outside the windows. The prosperity, the justice, peace. The women walking with dignity through streets where they once cowered. The girls going to school alongside boys. The women merchants and judges and council members and soldiers. That's what those scars bought, I tell them. That's what speaking up creates. Better world. Not perfect, but better. And better is worth fighting for. The girls look at me with wide eyes and I see it, that spark of understanding. That recognition that they too have power. That their voices matter just as much as boys' voices. That the world is waiting for them to be brave. And I think, yes, this is how it continues. This is how the chain of courage stays unbroken. One woman tells the truth, and it gives another woman permission to tell hers. And on until the whole world is transformed. Closing. So that's my story. That's how a blacksmith's daughter ended up changing a kingdom. That's how chains became freedom. How silence became voice. How one woman's courage rippled out to transform thousands of lives. But more importantly, that's how your story could begin. Right now. Today. In whatever situation you're facing. With whatever truth you've been afraid to speak. To whatever power needs to hear it. The throne room is waiting. The chains can be broken. The kingdom can be changed. All it takes is courage. All it takes is truth. All it takes is you, choosing to speak up instead of staying silent. I did it. You can too. And when you do, when you find your voice and use it, I want to hear about it. I want to know that this old woman's story inspired someone to be brave. That the chains I wore 50 years ago helped free someone today. So here's what I'm asking. After you've listened to this story, after you've felt that stirring in your chest that tells you it's time to speak your truth, leave me a message. Tell me the city you're watching from so that I can send you a hug across time and distance. Because every woman who chooses courage deserves to know she's not alone. Tell me what injustice you're finally going to name. Tell me what truth you're finally going to speak. Because you're not alone in this. Every woman who's ever stood up to power, who's ever risked something for what's right, who's ever chosen courage over compliance, we're all standing with you. Our stories are your strength. Our courage is your permission. The blacksmith's daughter who once wore chains is reaching across the centuries to tell you. You can do this. You're ready. The world needs your voice. So speak. And change everything. This is Astrid, daughter of Ragnar, first chair of the People's Council, royal advocate of Denmark, and friend to every woman brave enough to tell the truth. May your chains fall away. May your voice ring out. May your courage light the way for others. Now go. Be brave. Change your world.